How many of you, would you hold up your bulletin? How many of you have a bulletin? In there, in the first page, there was a little questionnaire. Did you guys fill that out? Did you take that test? Oh, nobody reads the bulletin. Is that what you're telling me? I spend all that time on it and you don't even read it. So if you would, just look through it right now. Just calculate in your head what the score would be, what your score would be. Hey, be honest though. Don't give what I call the Sunday school answer, right? You're in church, you kind of know what the answer should be. Don't give that answer. Give the answer that really reflects your heart, okay? We're not turning any tests in. Nobody's going to know what your score was. Only you and God, okay? But be honest with it. What this test is it rates, kind of how we feel, our attitude towards these different things, these different activities. Avoiding paying the fare on public transport. How justified do you think that is? Nobody needs to answer out loud, okay? Cheating on taxes if you have a chance. How justified is that? I mean, how is that okay for us to do that? Keeping money you found in the street, lying for your own interests, not reporting accidental damage you have done to a parked car, throwing away litter at a public place, driving under the influence of alcohol, making up a job application, buying something is stolen. Take the test and ask yourself, where do you land on these things? The reason that I have you take this test, the reason that we're talking about this today, is because we're talking about consistency in character. We're talking about being consistent. There was a study done in the UK not long ago, about 17 years ago, in the year 2000. And then they did another study about in 2014. And what they found was that the moral decline of their nation, there was a moral decline in their nation. Because basically they asked people about lying, adultery, drug taking, breaking the speed limit, drinking and driving, and handling stolen goods. And what they found was in the year 2000, people had this level of acceptance for those things. They said, some people were really strongly against, some people were for it, said, hey, it's no big deal, right? But when they did the second study in 2014, they found there was this huge moral decline. Let me give you an example. In 2000, 70% said that an extramarital affair was never justified. 70%. I think there's a lot of us in here would say, yeah, there's no reason, never should we do that, right? But then in the year 2014, that figure dropped to only 50%. That means if you had two people standing in front of you, one of them is going to say, hey, yeah, there's reasons why an extramarital affair would be okay. Now that study could have been done, even though it was done in the UK, it could have been done here, am I right? We have had this sharp moral decline in our nation, in our world. Gradually, people are tending to become more dishonest. They are more willing to tell lies, more willing to tolerate immoral behavior. Just those things that on that list that I had you in your bulletin, just look at those things, and I guarantee you, even if you don't feel like they're okay, you know people that would justify them. Right? I hear that all the time. People justifying things to me. Oh, Pat, it's not a big deal, Lying to an insurance company. Hey, you know what? That's a tax write-off for them. It's okay, right? How many of you have heard things like that? Hey, you know what? I don't pay all my taxes because, hey, come on. They blow all the money anyway, right? They're spending it on things I don't even believe in. So, forget it. I'm just going to, cheat the government. Right? I mean, there's always this justification that happens. The problem with this moral decline is that it has consequences for our society. For one thing, an increase in dishonesty is usually followed by an economic downturn. Did you know that? Because trust is so important. Because it allows individuals to engage in cooperative activities with people outside their friends and families. Because here's basically what it means. If you can't trust people outside of your own little circle, you're not going to do business with them, right? You're going to be too afraid to do business. And what happens? That affects our economy, right? We got to have trust. High level of trust in society helps to save what the economists call transaction costs. You see, in a trusting society, people don't have to pay for lawyers to draw up these extensive contracts. Because when you say you're going to do something, people can trust that you're going to do it, right? But in a distrusting society, in a society that has moral decay and decline, nobody can trust you, right? Nobody feels like they can trust you. So they have to have all these legal experts to draw up these ironclad contracts to force you to do what you said you were going to do. So things cost more now. The other problem is that low trust brings things such as poverty, crime, ill health, and unemployment. But it also has it also has a consequence for personal relationships. When there is a lack of honesty or trust, our relationships break down. And in a society that has a moral decline, you're going to see rampant divorce, right? Because divorce is when you come together and you commit yourself to each other for lifelong, being together for lifelong, right? For the rest of your life. You're making that commitment. You're making that agreement. But in a society of moral decline, where people don't keep their word, you're going to end up with a lot of divorce. Many of you know that's what we have in our nation today, right? What is the divorce rate? It's above 50%, I believe. This is the state we find ourselves in. The problem is a lack of integrity. Now here's the thing. It's easy to point fingers, right? It's easy for us to go, yeah, that's the way it is, Pastor. Our nation, yep, bunch of losers. I mean, I'm okay, I'm good, right? You're good, but everybody else out there, they're the losers, right? But is that really the case? I'm going to step on your toes. Are you a person of integrity? Do you keep your word? That's the question that I want you to look at today. Are you a person of integrity? Are you consistent? Because that's what integrity is all about. When you look at the Webster's Dictionary of Integrity, it says it's soundness of moral character. Integrity from a biblical viewpoint has to do with being morally sound. What does that mean? It means a person with integrity knows what is right and wrong and consistently chooses to live right no matter what the circumstances. Let me say that again. A person with integrity knows what is right and wrong and consistently chooses the right no matter what the circumstances. Even if it means it's going to bite them. Even if it means they're going to have pain to do it. They choose right. They're consistent. Unfortunately, we see a lot of inconsistent behavior, though, don't we? People know what is right, but they may or may not do it depending on the circumstances. I'll be moral and godly around my Christian friends because, hey, it gives me honor and respect. people look up to me in the church. I might even be a deacon or a board member. But when I'm around my non-Christian friends, it looks like to be moral, to be integrous like that, it makes me look intolerant. It makes me look judgmental. So I might change my spots, change my stripes. And the real kicker is this. And let me just say this. This is where you're going to figure out who you are. If the answer to your question, or the question that I asked, if you are a person of integrity, this is how you're going to know. When no one is looking. When no one's going to ever find out, are you consistent? When you're faced with a moral decision, and you know that nobody is ever going to know which way you chose to go, no one will ever know. Which way do you choose? Are you consistently choosing the right even in those moments? Because that's going to tell you who you really are. A lack of consistency is what leads to all kinds of problems. It breaks down our relationships because we no longer have people's trust. It causes us not to feel good about ourselves. Do you know that? It can cause all kinds of emotional issues, depression, all that kind of stuff, self-esteem issues, bulimia, all those kind of things. Why? Because you know you're wrong. And it eats at you. And it keeps eating at you. And it's causing you all this anxiety, all this pain. A person who has no integrity becomes a slave to impulses. But here's something else, and this is something that fathers, this is something I want to point at you to, specifically too, is that when we are people who are not integrous, when we are not consistent, we lose opportunities to impact our children. How many times have I heard the story of a child who says, yeah, I grew up in church. But my dad or my mom, they were so holy in church. But man, when we got home, you should have saw the things that they did. You should have seen how they behaved. Totally inconsistent. And it turned me off from God. I don't want to have anything to do with that hypocrisy. How many of you have ever heard a story like that? You see, that's what happens when we are inconsistent. We lose the opportunity to impact the next generation. We lose the ability to impact even our own generation because people see that we are inconsistent. We're not who we say we are. And no matter how hard we try to hide that, our sins always find us out. Sin always finds us out. Did you know that? The Bible even talks about that. It's always going to come out. You see, God doesn't let it be hidden for long. He exposes it. And here's the thing. If I asked you, I think everybody in this room would raise your hand. If I asked this question, how many of you, and I don't want anybody to raise their hand, because I know all of you are going to probably raise your hand. If I asked you this question, how many of you would want to be a person of integrity? A person that everybody can count on. Somebody that people know, man, I know that person is trustworthy. I know I can count on that person. All of us would say, yeah, I want that. I want that respect. I want that people to think that way. I want to be that person. So the question then becomes, how do we become that person though? We want to be that person. How do we become that person? Well, there's a great example. We've been studying the book of Daniel. And he is probably one of the best examples of a man of integrity. And we've been studying him, and if you weren't here for the past couple Sundays, Daniel was a part of Israel. He was, he and some friends were taken captive by Babylon, which is another nation, okay? Basically, Israel had sinned against God, okay? And as punishment, God allowed them to be attacked, and some of them were taken captive back to Babylon. Daniel and his friends were some of that crew, okay? Well, Daniel happened to be part of the royal family of Israel. And so the king of Babylon took some of these young men who were part of the royal family and said, okay, we're going to make them a part of our government, okay? We're going to make them part of our government. And what he attempted to do was he was going to strip them of their religion, of their culture, and he was going to make them Babylonians. They were going to serve his gods. They were going to follow his customs, the customs of Babylon, and they were going to reject all of Israel. All of that stuff that was Israelite customs, Jewish customs, and religion. Well, as you know, and we're going to talk about this later, Daniel and his friends, they made a decision. We're going to serve God. We're going to be godly men no matter what. Because they saw what happened when you turn away from God. They saw their nation destroyed because they turned away from God, and so they said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to be a part of that culture that says, no, we want to serve other gods. We're going to serve the God of heaven if it kills us. And they made that decision. And what's neat about this story, and I know most of you have been here for the past couple weeks, is that Daniel and his friends have lived that out. They have literally faced death, and they've chosen to serve God. They've chosen to do what's right. Well, today we're going to talk about a story where yet again, gosh, what a tough life these guys have had. We're going to talk about it again where Daniel faces death again. He faces a choice. Do I serve God or do I die? Or do I face death, I should say. Well, last week we talked about Belshazzar, right? And his pride. Remember the writing on the wall and all that good stuff? And we talked about how Belshazzar, basically King Darius, came in and wiped him out, and he took over the kingdom. Well, this is after that. This is where King Darius is now in charge, okay? And he kind of keeps some of the governors, like Daniel, he kind of keeps them in the same positions. And so this is what happened. In Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 through 5, it says this. Excuse me. It says, Darius the Mede decided to divide the kingdom into 120 provinces. And he appointed a high officer to rule over each province. The king also chose Daniel and 2 others as administrators to supervise the high officers and protect the king's interests. Daniel soon proved himself more capable than all the other administrators and high officers. And because of Daniel's great ability, the king made plans to place him over the entire empire. Then the other administrators and high officers began searching for some fault in the way Daniel was handling government affairs. But they couldn't find anything to criticize or condemn. He was faithful, always responsible, and completely trustworthy. How many of you wish we had leaders in government like that, huh? So they concluded, our only chance of finding grounds for accusing Daniel will be in connection with the rules of his religion. I love this. Think about this for a moment. This wasn't other Israelites looking at Daniel going, man, that's a man of God. Oh, he's great. This was people outside of that religion. They didn't serve God. They didn't like God. And they looked at Daniel and says, man, this guy is trustworthy. He can be counted on. When he says something, he does it. He's faithful. He's always responsible. He's always doing the right thing. And you can almost get the feeling they're stomping their foot like, darn him, you know? They just wish he would do something wrong. That's who Daniel was. I love that about him. You know, Daniel never changed his spots. He was in a political office, and he never did anything out of self-interest. He didn't change his spots to please the crowd. You can't put a price tag on integrity, because genuine integrity is not for sale. He was consistent. Integrity has to do with a sense of consistency between a person's inner values and attitudes and his outward words and actions. In other words, when you believe something, you live that out. And that was Daniel. If there was something that was right, Daniel did it. Didn't matter what it cost him. If it was right, he did it. How many of us can say the same? I got to be honest with you. There's times I've faced that decision. You know, if I just cut the corner, and you know what? I haven't always made the right decision. You know, if I just compromise, and it'll be better. It'll be easier. I was inconsistent. How about you? See, Daniel wasn't that way. If there was something that was right, he did it. If it was wrong, he stayed away from it. Daniel was someone everyone could trust. How many of you know somebody like a Daniel in your life? Somebody that you know, I can trust that person. That person's consistent. I hope so. If you can't raise your hand, it's sad. I'm not saying you did anything wrong. That's sad. That's a statement of our culture. And let me just encourage you, you be that person then. If nobody else in your life can ever be that person, you be that person then. Daniel, man, he was so moral and had so much integrity. The question is why? Let's look at Daniel chapter 6, verse 6 through 11. It says this: So the administrators and high officers went to the king and said, "Long live King Darius. We are all in agreement, we administrators, officials, high officers, advisors, and governors, that the king should make a law that will be strictly enforced. Give orders that for the next 30 days, any person who prays to anyone, divine or human, except to you, your majesty, will be thrown into the den of the lions." Now, how many of you think they really had the best interest of Babylon and the king at heart here? King, we love you so much. We just want people to pray to you. That's all it is. No. They were trying to trap Daniel, right? Now, of course, it says this in verse 8, "And now, your majesty, issue and sign this law so it cannot be changed. An official law of the Medes and Persians that cannot be revoked." Back in those days, in that government, they had laws that when the king signed a law, even he himself couldn't change it. That sounds a little weird, right? We think kings can do anything. But that's not how it was back then. If he signed a law, he had to live by it himself. Okay? He couldn't change it. Couldn't revoke it. Now, of course, the king thinks, wow, this is a great idea. People praying to me, I like it, right? This is awesome. You guys hit it on the head, right? And so he says, all right, So King Darius signed the law. But when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, I love this. Listen to this. This is so cool. It just gets signed, right? They just have the ceremony. The king has the special pen and he signs the document. And right afterwards, Daniel learns about it, and this is what he does. But when Daniel learned that the law had been signed, he went home and knelt down as usual in his upstairs room with its windows open toward Jerusalem. He prayed 3 times a day, just as he had always done, giving thanks to his God. Then the officials went together to Daniel's house and found him praying and asking for God's help. I love that. It says he did it just like he always did. Why? Because Daniel was consistent. Even if it meant his life, he lived out what he believed. He did what was right. Daniel was the same in public as he was in private. Do you notice that? He didn't make a big show. He did what he always did. He went home, closed the door, opened the windows, and prayed. He didn't expect anybody to be looking, but honestly, he didn't care. You see, Daniel, when nobody's looking, he was consistent. Daniel was a man of integrity, a man of God. That's what he claimed to be. He was a man of God. Everybody knew it. Those officials knew it. That's why they did this, to trap him. They knew what he was going to do. That's what I think is so amazing. That's what tells you that Daniel was so consistent, because that's what they expected him to do. They expected him to violate the king's command and do what he always did, which is the right thing. And they tried to use that to trap him. Isn't that amazing? That's how integrous Daniel is. The people outside the church, the people outside of his religion, knew that he is so consistent that he's going to do the right thing, even when threatened with death. Daniel knew what was important to God and consistently lived that out. He didn't just live out his own values of what he thought was right or wrong. There's a lot of opinion out there, right? A lot of opinion about, I think God thinks it's okay if we do this. I think God thinks this is okay. How many of you ever heard that? There's a lot of opinion out there, right? But opinion is worthless. It's what does God's word say? And that's what we have to live out. Daniel could have made those same kind of excuses. I think God will be okay if I don't pray a couple of times until this thing blows over. I think God would have been okay with that. But he didn't. He subscribed to God's values, and with God's help, conformed his conduct to those values. Wherever God's values came in conflict with society, who do you think Daniel chose? He chose God, right? He did what God wanted him to do. That's the question that you and I need to face. When God's values contradict what society is telling us we should do or we shouldn't do, what do we choose? Which way do we go? I hope that we're going to be consistent. I hope that we're going to live out the values of God, no matter what it might cost us. The true test of a person's integrity is who they are when no one's looking. A person who is all talk will have no integrity when no one is around. It will reveal how consistent they are. I'm telling you, you're going to get a real clear picture of who you are in those moments. There's been plenty of times where I've realized where I am and I've been ashamed. Nobody's looking. Nobody knows. But I know. And I know he knows. Who are you when nobody looks? When nobody knows? It's going to reveal whether you really serve God or just say that you do. So the question is, do we live for God all the time or just some of the time? How does someone become a person of integrity? I can just imagine some of you asking that question. I mean, you're going, okay, Pastor, I get it. But how do we do that? How do we I want to be that person. I think you want to be that person. How do we do that? I mean, do we just make the right decision? I mean, is it that simple? Yes and no. Let me show you what I mean. You see, long before Daniel was threatened with the lion's den, he and his friends made a decision. It was when he was only 14 years old. They were sitting in a dungeon, and they were being fed scrumptious food, if you can imagine this. Wonderful food. You can just imagine. I mean, what's your favorite restaurant, okay? You know, Tahoe Joe's or whatever, Chili's, whatever you want, you know, Red Lobster. I mean, this is the kind of food that they were being served, okay? Maybe not exactly, but you get the picture, right? They're being served this awesome food. The problem is that the Babylonians had a custom where all of their food was sacrificed to the idols that they worshipped, right? And then they would eat it. Well, in the Jewish law, in God's law, it said, do not eat food sacrificed to idols. That's not allowed. You're not allowed to do that. So Daniel and his friends were faced with a decision. Now think about this for a moment. It was food. You could easily make it seem like, oh, it's not a big deal. Daniel, just chow down, dude. Get through and, move on. Right? How many of you have ever had friends who've said something like that to you when you faced a moral decision that may seem like it's no big deal, right? Just don't worry about it. Just do it and get on with it. Why are you causing all this ruckus? Well, Daniel and his friends, they made a decision. As I said earlier, they saw what happened to their nation when their nation turned away from God and began to serve other gods and began to compromise, right? And they said, enough is enough. We're in this predicament because of decisions that our countrymen made. We're not going to make the same. We're going to live for God in every decision. Every decision. And so when it came time to eat this food, Daniel and his friends decided, no, we're not going to do it. This is what it says in Daniel 1:8. It says this, but Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and wine given to them by the king. Daniel decided, I'm going to live for God. He didn't want to have anything to do with the sins of his nation. He said he made a decision that no matter what happened to him, he was going to live to please God. Integrity is figured out in the small decisions of life, but it is revealed in the furnace of trials and tragedy. And that's what I want you to see. Daniel, in this seemingly small decision called food, right? Again, Red Lobster, Chili's, right? It's being served to him. And he says, no, I'm drawing a line. I'm not even going to do that. Yeah, I know a lot of people could argue, oh, it's no big deal, and just do it, Daniel, just kind of get through the situation. But no, I'm drawing a line. I'm not going to sin against my God. I'm going to do what's right in everything. I'm going to be consistent, even in the small things, especially in the small things. And you know what happens when you do that? When you make that decision in the small areas of life, then you make those decisions in the big areas too. You know what happens when you compromise in the small things? You end up compromising in the big things. You see, you will be consistent one way or the other. You'll either be a person who is consistently integrous or someone who's consistently not. And that's how you become a person of integrity, by choosing in the small areas of life, those small decisions, and you draw that line and say, no, I will not cross it. I live for God. It may seem like no big deal, but it's big enough. I say no. I live for God. You see, we can't expect to have integrity when faced with major temptation if we've been unfaithful in the small things all along the way. All along the way. Guys, you can't expect to have integrity when a beautiful woman makes a pass at you if all the week prior you've been on the internet looking at pornography. You want to be a faithful husband, then be faithful all the time. Not just some of the time. You got to make the decision even in the small or seemingly small areas of life. Especially when no one's looking. That's how you become a person of integrity. That's how you become a person of consistency. Here's what I want you to understand, and I want you to remember this. You need to live for an audience of one. You need to live for an audience of one, and that one is God. You need to, every decision you need to bring and say, you know what? Is God going to be pleased with this? I don't care if anybody else knows. God knows. And is he going to be happy with me? I don't care if everybody else is going to hate me. Is God going to be pleased? You live for an audience of one. That's a person of integrity.